across the nation. As mentioned, New York State made a rather historic announcement to give its first 200 licenses towards people of color and also people who have been arrested for cannabis and have cannabis citations. So speaking of social equity, how is that concept affected what you've done in National City and how things have come to be in National City, and what are your personal feelings about it, about the concept?
So personal feeling on social equity is a priority, and how I view social equity, we've had historically, and Laura said this, I appreciate it, and so did Lance, but so we've had decades of Black and brown men, mostly men, selling cannabis and incarcerated for it. So the generational trauma that causes, separation of families, when they do get out, the recidivism, not being able to find gainful employment, not being able to have upward mobility, can, much more difficult, if not impossible, to even purchase a home. So don't have that wealth building. So
or to get a job, or to anything that normal people do. If you have a felony on your record, you can imagine.
Anything, and it's been predominantly Black and brown men. What frankly pisses me off is that now that it's suddenly legal, who's profiting from it and who has that access? It's predominantly white males that have it, and I think that's wrong. And it's honestly very, very difficult because you can, and we don't want to exclude white men, right? So I'm not saying that. But the priority should be those who've been previously incarcerated. I would say that. So not necessarily yes, Black and brown folks. Yes, I think. When we have these licenses, it should be local, but the priority for me, if we want to achieve true social equity, it should be those that have been incarcerated for it, including their families. I think that, and those happen to be Black and brown
right.
folks.
And so those people operated in what people in the cannabis movement or in the industry like to call the traditional or legacy market, which is considered a compassionate term for what most common folks will call the black market. That's considered
or illicit market.
Or illicit market. It's considered a little gauche and disrespectful. So I personally use the words traditional and legacy where I can. And so how is that shaking out in National City? What does that mean?
So it's still in process, and what I've heard from community residents. So we've had our top three, and I think I'd really like Laura to speak on this more because she was one of the applicants. But I think what our council policy when we drafted this, or at least what our intent was for this to go to local residents, was to go to those previously incarcerated. I'm hearing that hasn't happened, but full disclosure, I haven't had the opportunity to fully review everything because it's still in staff level and process. So I'm keeping an open mind, but if that isn't what's happened, if our goal was to make sure this is equitable for those who've been previously incarcerated, those who are truly local, and Black and brown folks, and if that's not happening, then it's good that this was a pilot and it's a small geographic area, so we need to fix it, and I want to hear from you guys how we solve the social equity problem, or what your ideas are.
There's a very quickly, one second, sorry, right before you get into it, because I know you have a lot of context to share on this. So National City does allow for formerly incarcerated people. A lot of places don't. City of San Diego, Chula Vista, if you have a citation or if you have anything on your record, or anything period, but even cannabis related, you're disqualified. So if you are one of those legacy market people who does happen to have something on their record, you're toast, you can't do it. So it is notable that there are jurisdictions that will allow that.
And it's even more notable that National City was one of only 2 cities in the entire state of California to vote down Proposition 64. It was by 11 votes, which city council members point out to each other. But the fact that they have done the turnaround here is really a testament to the leadership that the council has, truly. When it comes to social equity, it's a tough one. You look at Oakland, California, where they funded cannabis kitchens. That they have to be nonprofits, and they build a cannabis kitchen, and then they train people 24/7. So if you're a small person, and it was really for people who had been previously incarcerated for cannabis and for drug use. And if, let's say, a woman wanted to start an edibles business, she could rent that kitchen at a discount between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. and go and manufacture in that kitchen without having to get a lease, build a kitchen, go through the regulatory process, and all of that. Now, where I think Oakland really bailed on this, and what I think National City could do, is they needed a retail outlet. Because if you don't have a retail outlet to sell your gummies or your brownies or whatever you're making, you got no business.
Yeah, you can't just sell, I can't
And
just
there
like
are
sell
so,
DUIs.
just like I said, the numbers here, it should be 5,000, we should have over 5,000 dispensaries here. In the entire county of San Diego, we have 50. And all of them have their hands out, they want slotting fees, they want your people in there working all it, I mean, you can't do that if you're an entrepreneur and trying to start up. So, you know, expanding the number of actual just retail places, because that's the last mile. There's lots of growers in California, there's lots of manufacturers, but in San Diego County, we do not have access and retail outlets for the general public. And it's a safety issue at some point, because this stuff is tested and regulated that comes through stores. It's not if you're buying it, and there's a lot of public confusion. If I Google right now, National City cannabis dispensaries, I'll get a list of 6, and none of them are legal because they're not up and operating yet. So it's a real cat and mouse game for law enforcement there, but National City has really led the way, and the thing is, the way they're scoring right now doesn't factor in the social equity part. That will come in the second part, which is when
you say scoring
for the applications.
Yeah,
For the
for the
applications,
applications,
right.
so the process in various cities that you submit an application and consultants will come in and they'll give you a grade, and then based on that, the city council or whichever jury, is deciding will take that number, so.
Right, exactly. And with National City, they didn't do it in what they call a true merit-based thing where they read the whole thing and decide, which is very subjective and can be arbitrary and capricious depending on who's reading it. But in National City, it was kind of a pass-fail, either you included this or you didn't, all the way down. And they're still going through the appellate process, which I will respect at this point. And I'm not saying anything here that I haven't already said at a public meeting in National City either. But one of the problems that you run into with these social equity programs is there's a real tokenization. They find somebody somewhere, they'll give them 51%.
Yes.
They'll say, we'll buy you out for $200,000 in a year when the city's not looking and no longer cares. And that's what's happened. Stizzy, which actually they're the top scorer in National City, and they've gotten in trouble in this in 2 other jurisdictions. So I'm assuming that the National City attorney will look at operating agreements and, validate that information to make sure it's accurate. Because it's, you get, if you change the game, you get better players. I mean, it just happens in pretty much every industry if they can find a way to cut corners. But making sure that giving a local preference, I thought was a really terrific aspect of National City. It wasn't the sole criteria, but it was unique. It was unique in San Diego County. It was the first ones to do that. Because otherwise you get outside, again, you get the white boys from New York with the social equity, with the, who
Private
have the
equity, VC
private
money.
equity, VC money, and their daddies had great lawyers when they got busted for pot. So, we want to even
None of
this
them are
out.
smoking weed, they don't smoke weed. I've interviewed all of them, they don't smoke weed.
But we need to even the playing field, and by evening the playing field, you've got to give some people who've been held back a chance to go ahead.
I'm gonna pause with you right there because we have a question.
Just a quick comment and a quick question. My comment is, as a 68-year-old that is totally involved in the senior community, I'm on the executive board of the California Alliance of Retired Americans, on my e-board for my union, and I'm not speaking for either organization, but just, I have found seniors to be overwhelmingly in support of the legalization.
Too. It's actually the highest growing category in cannabis sales in multiple places across the country is people 65 and up.
And even more importantly,
Women too.
in states where adult use cannabis is legal, the drug companies' sales for over-the-counter pain medications has dropped.
So
Correlation, causation, that makes me nervous as a journalist calling that, direct, but I'm with you.
right, but just please open your mind that seniors are not the enemy.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
And then my quick question is, and what I'm a 1000% support, Marcus will tell you that, but I have always, as someone who worked in a dangerous job, I was a wastewater operator for the city for 30 years, I am scared about people being not in their best mind, running dangerous equipment that I would have had to work with them and be put in potential danger, and and around the driving stuff, since there isn't like a quick test. And I'm just wondering how with the lounge that would somehow be.
Do you mind if I?
Oh, yeah, no, go ahead.
So, the question was just, about the risks associated with cannabis consumption, both individually and at a public level. And it's a really valid point, I think sometimes when you're in the cannabis movement, people think, oh, you just want everybody, smoking cannabis all the time, anywhere, with no rules or restrictions anywhere. And that's not the case. I mean, we have many laws and many ways to keep people safe. So she was asking about, well, what about drugs driving coming from this consumption lounge? Well, we already have, vehicle code that covers that, and you can 100% be charged and convicted for driving under the influence of cannabis. What about, the liability? We have what's known as dram shop laws, which is also applied to a consumption lounge, where if someone is harmed by a patron that over-consumed, they can and will get sued. And it will, hopefully they have insurance, and if they don't have insurance, then that company is going to lose their business because they were irresponsibly providing cannabis, too much cannabis to something. It's actually really challenging because there is a certain amount of liability for these businesses. What is overconsumption? At what point do you say, sorry, dude, you're too stoned?
How does that get decided?
Yeah, I don't even know.
It's just all new territory. I mean,
There are entrepreneurs working furiously around the clock to find the test.
It's not gonna work.
It's
not
funded,
scientifically
yeah,
proven.
but the way it works, it's like if somebody is erratic, let's say, the night before they had legal opioids that they took, and there's a residual effect in the morning, how do you test for that? I mean, if somebody is impaired driving. But they are working, and I know that the state of California through cannabis taxes has been furiously funding any university who could come up with an accurate test.
MIT
That
is
will give it
working on a bunch of them.
Yeah, but I think we'll find our way to work around this, but I think, the next generations too are much smarter about designated drivers than mine was.
Yeah, Uber and Lyft have, the accidents have really gone down with drive share. Another thing you brought up too with regard to employment liability or you don't have the right to drive a forklift while you're stoned.
And the recent law outlawing, or saying that you can't, drug test for fire someone based on a positive test for THC, there is a carve out in that new state law that exempts federal employees and also employees who work with heavy machinery and that
building
kind
and
of stuff.
contractors, even broadband, there's quite a few carve-outs in there.
Yeah. Yes.
Such equity. I'm a commercial agent. Last year I was working on a potential dispensary lease in downtown. It's not allowed in downtown, but I was working with a brokerage who had a lobbyist, and they said they had to have a location to go in to, work with the city on amending. The lease would have required payment of rent.
Yes.
For
That entire time.
3
It's
4
insane.
years.
It's insane
The
because it takes
cost
years.
is so high. How can anybody that's not big bucks get into the
You
business?
can't.
I'll give an example. Imperial Beach was a city I
Actually,
worked
Laura,
very closely.
would you mind recapping what you said just for everybody?
Yeah, what you were talking about as a commercial real estate license, to have a lease in downtown San Diego, to hire a lobbyist and then try and get it changed, you actually had to have payment. The lease had to be active
Right.
and paying on a lease for years.
Without
while this
having the
process went through.
license.
Yes.
Without having the
Operate that
license, right. And most of the cities do that. They want a location. National City did not require that. Chula Vista, they wanted a location, but they didn't require that you had a lease on it. And a lot of people changed their location afterwards, which was interesting because it's all changed too. You find a lot of profiteering that goes on with landlords who just happen to have a parcel in a place. And this is one of the challenges when cities severely restrict it. Imperial Beach restricted it so much, they made it 1,000 feet instead of 600 feet from a sensitive use area. And in a dense beach community, that's nearly impossible. So there were only 2 parcels, none of them built. And both parcel owners wanted $150,000 to use their address in the application, whether you got it or not. And it was a lottery. It's like, if I'm on a lottery ticket, I'm paying $2. I'm not paying $150,000.
Well, you mind if I respond to that?
Yeah,
real quick?
please.
You know, because,
He lives in
you know,
IB, so.
well, I do live in IB, but that's not, this is a business, and a business needs to, you know, be sustainable and potentially turn a profit. So we could sit here and, you know, sort of, you know, complain about big corporations and profit and that sort of thing. But, and I guess where I come from is I started out as a criminal defense attorney. You know, so when I hear someone, man, I didn't get, you know, my $1 million business. Well, I remember when people were getting thrown in jail, seriously. So, you know, that for me, you know, is positive that people are not getting thrown in jail for cannabis. So when we look at the industry piece of it, you know, what can we do about that? Well, encourage, you know, the businesses to take social equity importance and to add that to their business
Not
structure.
just businesses, but governments, because it's gonna have to
Well, I
come
mean,
from,
that,
well, that
I'm not sure I necessarily
right?
agree with that. I mean, that's not the type of government that we live in. The government puts rules and then businesses come in and we, as consumers, choose to go to one business or another. You know, a lot of times people want to, you know, complain and then they go to Walmart and they go to McDonald's and they say, oh geez, yeah, Walmart and McDonald's, they always bully them and they pay $150, and this is like, well, who supports these businesses? You know, what type of, you know, local, national, city businesses and business owners are you personally going to be supporting with your dollars? Because you know, that's just my personal.
But if the big corporations have so much money that they take away all the other options that you're incentivized to use that business, then isn't that where government should come in and maybe say, we gotta make sure that the people who aren't capitalized have a shot at this too?
I think that's a different form of government that we don't live in.
Yeah.
You know, that's just a different thing where the
For
government
sure.
tells people where to buy anything, and I think more about like, you know, bread and cheese and water than weed. I mean, you have a real problem, grow your own weed.
Yeah, that is true, and we are allowed to grow it in California up to 6 plants per person, which is actually huge because in other states, one of the first things that will happen when weed goes legal is there is some company involved in the lobbying process who will take away home grow. So that is actually a fundamental, that's a big thing that we have that here. It's
It's a
not a
big
small
right
deal.
in Florida. It's one of the biggest cannabis companies trying to keep home grow out of the state law in Florida.
Yeah,
I
New
do-
Jersey, it's
Oh,
legal.
real quick, Laura, sorry to cut in. I just wanted to respond to that on the, because you brought up the downtown and one of the challenges I see, because it's a land use issue, and it's the distance requirements. And so my background also is in city planning, so I majored that at San Diego State. And so we have those land use restrictions to protect from environmental impacts, or in this case, the sensitive uses which is kids. I don't think, and so say something that's very controversial, I don't think that's the best approach to protect safety or youth or anyone else, and Laura kind of brought it up. So when we have parking requirements, all that, ideally we want people, and I say this as a planner, we want folks walking and biking and taking transit. And if the concern is the presence or proximity to youth, like schools or whatnot, I mean, it's not the business itself. Like, people will walk there. It's the advertising on the outside. So, and I think that can be regulated with signage, with codes. Like, so we don't want, well, at least what I don't want, I'll speak for myself. Like, I don't want, cannabis advertised to youth. But if youth walk past the store, youth walk past liquor stores, so that happens. So I think we don't need to shield our youth. Like, we need to show them, no, this happens, this is real, this exists. Your parents use it, and teach them to be responsible. And I think part of, the taxes that we generate from that, I talked to Laura about this, like, those taxes can be used to prevent that youth access.
Yeah, where does tax revenue in National City from cannabis, where is that going?
Laura, did you want to,
General fund. The argument amongst the council for a long time, although it has dissipated, was whether to set it aside specifically for social equity programs. But they decided to put it in the general fund and then allot it from there, which is what the county is doing too.
Yes.
There was a discussion about that, like, there being a special fund set aside, but ultimately we do control the general fund, so as a council, as a body.
Right, so you can choose to earmark that for different things if you need.
And I did want to point out too, one other thing about lounges, which Marcus has pointed out numerous times over the last year, is if you have somebody who's in Section 8 housing or in an apartment building where no smoking is allowed, they'll get kicked out.
it's illegal.
It's illegal, they'll get kicked out. This gives them a chance, instead of smoking in the local park, which people would be afraid of,
Also
people
not legal.
pro-business might be. It gives, it's a gather, instead of drinking that, drink with your brown around it in the park, you have bars. And the same thing for cannabis, if people want to enjoy cannabis in a social, safe setting, that's what lounge is allowed for. So I'm proud of National City for jumping up for this.
Does anybody have any questions? We have just a couple of minutes left. Anything at all? Yes.
So as far as as far as like the fair use, are you doing anything with like the multi-generational trauma, the stuff that's happening within all of us that's causing like lots of conflict? Are you doing anything to heal the people?
I think one of those things, one of those approaches is prioritizing the jobs for those who've been previously incarcerated. So that's something I've talked to city staff about. I think the challenge is, what goal do you set, right? What goal percentage? And it gets to the point where, we don't want to over-regulate the business too much, so it's really difficult or impossible to operate. So, but ideally, so I don't know, and I'd be curious to hear from the panelists what they think that percentage goal is, but I don't know if it's 20%, if it's 50%, but ideally it's those who've been previously incarcerated for cannabis. They should be the ones who get the priority to work there, and that helps. They're the ones that typically have had a struggle, like trying to find gainful employment, and so finding them that and that niche, and then using the revenue that we have for those trauma, for those programs and whatnot with the city.
I'm more the carrot than the stick on that. I think you should incentivize businesses to do it by either waiving fees for people who are applying, or there's certain incentives you can do for businesses to really bring them into that. What do you think?
So I think about the economics of it, and I guess I come at it from an objective standpoint, because we can sit here and we have these ideals that that we want to help folks deal with generational trauma, but I think if that gets into government regulation and you over-regulate a business, then it ends up becoming cost prohibitive for the people that you're trying to help. If you set up these things, and we have this consumption lounge, and it was all these red tape and everything that went into it, and it's $100 just to walk in. We could all say like, oh man, that's so great. We have a consumption lounge, but who's going there?
And how many layers of taxes are there? There's state, city, local, right? Like that adds.
Right. So I mean, sometimes
yeah.
whether you like it or not, when I talk about Walmart or McDonald's, like there's a reason people go to those, right? Because these big corporations found a way to get the price down, and so there's that aspect of it as well, which is affordability for people of lower economic status, which I think gets lost a lot.
I think so. My pushback on that is only government created this problem, though. So I think it takes government to fix it. The government was the one that, and I'm sure you agree with this line, that they over-criminalized, and now you have a situation where it's the wealthy, powerful, and privileged that are now benefiting. And so I don't think that it will fix it by itself. I agree we don't want to over-regulate, but we do need some kind of government intervention. I think the challenge, to your point, Lance, is like finding what that balance is.
It's not a free market. It's a warped and suppressed market right now, because they're limiting the number of businesses that are allowed to do this. And when you do that, when you allow a cable franchise, for example, back in the day, but now you have internet, so that bypasses the cable. I'm trying to think of a good example, but if you suppress the supply, you will have this leakage into the illicit markets that will continue until you open it up. If you go to other places, other states or other places, even in California, where they open it up and it's unlimited. They don't say, okay, we're only going to give you 5 licenses or only 8 licenses in the city. It's like, hey, anybody who can qualify can do that. That's what happened in Oklahoma. They have no social equity problem at all. Minorities and women have had huge opportunities for cannabis in Oklahoma, not exactly a bastion of liberal thought, Oklahoma. But they have 2,200, and we have 50 in our county, and the whole state of Oklahoma has 2,200, and they're similar in size. So anybody with $2,500 can literally pay the fee and open up their store.
That is a very good thing about Oklahoma's market. Oklahoma's kind of a crazy prototypical market, and if you're not hip to it, encourage you to do it, but we are out of time. And I feel like we kicked off so many discussions that honestly could be their own panels. The cannabis is the topic that just always has something to talk about. So thank you all so much for coming. I hope it was informative and useful for you. And thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, Jackie, and our panelists for being here. Again, this will be available online for you to watch. Share it with your share with your friends who are Voice San Diego members. Next is lunch, so you can head out to the rotunda in the front. We've got all the sponsors with community booths out there, so you can get to know them and then have some lunch, and then we'll be in the main hall for 1:15 is the start of the next session. So